Good morning, Janice.
Good morning, Anthony.
Today we'll talk about how professional and amateur executor costs the same. So how much does a professional executor cost? Most people are surprised to learn that it's pretty much exactly the same as if you chose a professional versus your unemployed nephew who's on the couch and just happens to have the spare time to, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it.
Sure, why not?
So, most people will actually come to the conclusion like, oh, if I'm paying the exact same, why not go with the experienced professionals?
Yep.
So, as a matter of fact, beyond that, your estate will actually probably even save on expenses and even potentially fees when you go with a professional versus an amateur, which we will talk about now.
Yes.
All right. So first, what are the fees? So executor fees are almost always set by state law. And they really fall into two categories. It's really not two categories. But anyway, percentages or what's a reasonable fee, air quotes.
Yep.
So the percentage usually works out to be something like something between 2 or 3% of the value of the estate. And it's usually some kind of sliding scale, kind of like your income tax brackets. It depends on how much your estate is worth, or it depends on how much money you made. But it usually works out effectively to about 2 to 3%, which is less than half a broker's commission in most states. Right. By contrast, the states that use the reasonable standard, that's usually pretty vague. But in effect, most states that have the reasonable standard have a sort of customary percentage that the court will say, yeah, that's fine, that's reasonable. So it is essentially many of those states are still essentially percentage states. And then lastly, the reasonable fee sometimes ends up just basically being hourly. And if the court is cool with your hourly rate and the number of hours you charged. But, with an amateur who's never done this before and in an hourly rate state, and a reasonable hourly rate state, because they'll just end up spending a lot more time on it, which we'll talk about a bit later, it can get really expensive.
Yes.
And then you have the court might not approve it. The amateur executor might be like, what the heck? I spent so much time on this. I spent my life working on this. Like, you shouldn't have. You should hire somebody else.
Right. We see it.
Oh, and we also talk about, we've talked about before, Janice, about how sometimes amateur executors or family-based executors, they just attract more drama. Like the heirs are more likely to contest their fees, and they might not even get paid at all.
We've seen it where they get nothing after years of hard work. Years. Yep. We've seen it all too often.
Okay, so let's talk now about how a professional executor can actually potentially save time and money and expenses. So, just because anyone who's done anything, hundreds of times over versus doing it for the first or even second time in their life, they're just going to be better at it. Just efficiencies, experience, familiarity, yeah?
Yep, and have contacts, right? Like you're not going to call around to 17 banks when you just need to make one phone call to one bank. Yeah, yep.
And you know which court clerk is the surly one, and you know which one will actually get your stuff through, hopefully.
Nope. When they take lunch, when they're going to answer the phone. Yeah.
So in terms of those reasonable hourly fee states, you're just saving a bunch of time right there.
Yes.
Janice, in particular, will know which vendors are best to use and who has the best prices, and not necessarily the cheapest price, but the most, the best value.
Yes.
And what do you mean by vendors? I mean, there's just so many things that you have to do, especially if you have real estate in your estate. You have to hire clean-out crews. You might need simple renovations, basic paint, and cleaning.
Room clean, right?
Mm-hmm. We need accountants. We need other professionals to help us. And, not everybody, everyone's like, oh, yeah, I know how to do probate estates, or I know how to deal with probate accounts. Not everybody really does.
Yeah.
And some people, unfortunately, will try to kind of upcharge in those situations. So it's good to have a good, I was going to say Rolodex, but nobody will know what that means. A good address book.
No, I know. Yeah, a good address
book. A good contact app of who to call.
Because we've been through them, right? Like when you were talking about the clean out crews. We have actually been there with them to know which one works better, quicker, more effective, even though they may be a little more expensive. But
versus who's going to leave a huge scratch in the elevator and have our building yelling at us,
Yes, exactly. And then leaves you standing there for 8 hours at a time, which
Yeah.
isn't exactly the cheapest. Yep, nope, we've done it, been there, done that. Yeah.
And then lastly, we can also, based on experience, we know which services just aren't necessary. We see a lot of proposals to stage apartments, and it's just not worth. Staging is really expensive. We didn't know until we've been doing this. It's just not worth. It's often, let's say, not worth the cost. And sometimes contractors will pitch pretty extensive renovations, like, oh yeah, we can get that marble quartz, kryptonite in there or whatever. We don't really need that. We just need to sell this thing. We just need it to not look like it's been lived in for 40 years.
We don't need to knock out walls and put in. No, this isn't HD TV.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Clean it, get it ready. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of non-professional executors get into that HGTV mode where it's like, oh, you know what? This is not my money or my house. I'm just running this for the family. Oh, I can. It's almost like their little reality show.
Right. It's like, okay, well, we're going to change all the colors and and then they put colors that you don't want or that the buyer is going to replace anyway.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, we've seen staging bills for what, 20,000?
Oh,
I mean,
goodness.
Like a lot. And as an heir, I'd be pretty upset if some of my money went to putting furniture in and then taking it out. Like there's not really
Didn't really. I mean, I don't want to argue about the value, or there are definitely circumstances where it can maximize value, but estates, come on, we're just trying to move on.
Right, because the longer that house sits there, the more you have to pay for everything.
100%.
Yes.
Speed matters. Yep.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So then lastly, when on the topic of amateurs versus professional executors, there is one exception to the rule that they're pretty much the same. In terms of fees, is that first, how do banks charge when they want to be when they serve as the executor? And this is the exception because banks will often ask for special language in the will or trust, opting out of state law and getting basically higher fees with a higher minimum. And that's their prerogative. They don't want to be bothered with it. The large entity doesn't want to be bothered with a smaller estate or with a smaller fee. And that's fine if you're okay with it. And that's often on top of some pretty hefty minimum investment requirements. I think the trend now is banks will not accept a nomination to be your executor unless you have a pretty good amount of money liquid invested with them. So they're earning fees on that as well. Yeah.
And I think I just made a couple calls for that. I think it's upwards of the 5 million mark. Like it's you have to be very wealthy. I think we were calling about a state that was 2.5 and they're like, nope, too small.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's also if they accept accept being your executor at all. They have committees, they have risk analysts. I don't know exactly what the process is, but I know people have been frustrated. Our clients have come to us frustrated.
Process.
Yes.
Yep, just to get approved, and then they'll have
Okay, we approved you. Now give us all your money to invest with for you.
Right. It will.
I mean, that's it. We get this. Most people, like, their eyes bug out when they realize that hiring a professional costs exactly the same in theory, and actually, in effect, probably less than their relative or friend who's never done it before, and they didn't really want to burden them anyway. So, this is a breakdown of how that works and why it is that way for anyone who felt that way.
Yep. So if you don't want your cousin who's sitting in the basement to do it and you want an executor, check out Anthony's book, How to Hire an Executor.
How did he get demoted from the couch to the basement?
Well, I mean, he lives in the basement. He was just on the couch, playing video games,
Gotcha.
I guess, waiting for a snack. I don't know. But same price.
Very good. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks, Janice, as always. And we will talk soon next time.
Talk soon.
Bye now.